how to use Google Sheet as backend for your app. In this example, I'm going to demonstrate how to create a to-do backend. So to do that, we'll need to open up a Google Sheet. Once we open up a Google Sheet, for our first sheet, let's rename it and call it to-do. We'll need 4 fields: the ID, the content, and created at, and updated at. So we just need these 4 fields. Let's color it a little bit to make it look a bit nicer and bold it. All right. Now that we have this basic structure, let's click on extensions and open up app script. Rename app script, call it to-do backend. For the first function, we'll create a getTodoTable. This function will allow us to get the entire data on this to-do table. So we'll need to access the spreadsheet. Use spreadsheet app dot get active spreadsheet. So when you call this function, it's going to get the spreadsheet that is connected to this app script. Next, we'll need to get the table. To get a table, we're going to get it from the spreadsheet that we have access to and get sheet name. Get sheet by name. As for the name, it needs to be the same as this. We name it as to do. It is case sensitive, so make sure that whatever that you put over here, it should be the same over here. Now that we have our table, we are going to return it. Okay, our first function is complete. For the next function, I would like to create to do in a table. So let's call it createTodo. So for this function, it's just going to take in one argument. And the argument that we'll take is the content of the to-do. So before we do anything, we'll need to get the to-do table first. So let's get the table using our first function. getTodoTable. Once we have the table, we'll need to append a new row into the table because again, we are creating a to-do. So to include a new row into the table, we need to create an array. So what is this array that we need to create? So if we go back to our Google Sheet, you notice that we have 4 fields, or rather 4 columns: the ID, content, created at, and updated at. Copy this entire this entire row, and paste it over here. So this will be the structure for our array. Our array should look something like this. We have the ID, content, created at, and updated at. So let's create a new row. For a new row, the first is going to be the ID. For the ID, I always like to use a UUID. So I'm going to use the built-in utilities and get UUID. As for the content, I'll just include the content as specified by the argument over here. And for the created at and updated at, I will create a variable that is called now, which is the current date and time. As for the actual value to be included within the inside this new row, I will use now dot to iso string. I'll do the same for updated at field. Once I'm done, it is really easy to append this new row to the table. I just have to call table.append row. And this function, will take in the new row. Let me just remove this just to make it a bit clean. All right. Now that we have created a to-do function, the next thing we need to do is to test it out. So I'm going to create a test file. Click on this plus icon and click script. Let's call it test. For this first function, I will call it test create to do. And we will try our create to do function, which only takes in the content. So for the content, what is it I want to do? Perhaps I want to buy banana at supermarket. This is what I'm going to do. So let's see what happened when I try to run this. Okay, before I try to run this, just make sure that the selected function is the correct function. In this case, I'm going to use test createTodo. So if we just go back to our Google Sheet for now, you'll notice that there is nothing within this table yet except for the header. So there's nothing here yet. Now, when we run this test createTodo, it's going to create a new record, and let's see whether it works. Click run. All right, so I need to authorize some permissions. Click review permissions. Select your account. Google hasn't verified. Don't worry about this. Just click advanced and click on this last link, which is the unsafe link. Just click on it and just allow it. So okay, execution completed. If we go and take a look at Google Sheet now, you notice that a new row has been appended. This is the ID. We have the content, created at, and updated at. So this means that we have successfully created a function where we can create a new row in a table. Next, we'll create a getTodo function. So for the getTodo function, it will take in an ID, and given an ID, it's going to return us the entire row that matches that ID. So like everything else, we always need to access the table. So we're going to getTodoTable. Once we are done, we'll need to get the row that matches this ID. All right. So how do you do that? So to do that, we'll need to use table get range. When we call table get range, you notice that the first argument that we need to give it is the row index or the row number. And just take note that if you are using, because we are using a Google Sheet, the row indexing, it starts with 1. Whereas, in other form of programming, it always starts with 0. So just take note of this, right? So for example, if we are accessing the header, the row number is 1. If you are accessing this, the row number is 2. All right? So let's complete this function. So in a table, we need to get a range. For the row, we need to include the row number that matches this ID. For now, we don't know what that row number is. We just don't know yet. So I'm just going to put a placeholder for now. And for the column, it's going to start with 1, right? Because for the range that I want to start at, it's going to start at column 1. Certain row, but it's going to start at column 1. As for the third argument, I need to indicate how many rows do I want to return from this function. In this case, I just want 1 row. And how many columns do I need? If you take a look at our table, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. Of course, we can just hard code it like this. We need 4 columns, but there's actually a better way to do it dynamically. And in order for us to know what is the total number of columns, we can always use this method from the table, get last column. Right? When you call table.getLastColumn, it's going to give you the column number for the last column. So in this case, it's going to be 4. Now, this function is not complete yet. It is not complete. And that is because our row number is undefined. So we need to get this row number. How do you do that? So right now, in order for us to find out what is a row number that is correct, we need to find the row number that matches a given ID. All right. So let us try to create a few more rows to just help you illustrate what's going on over here. Maybe something like this. All right. So let's say that I want to get a row that matches this ID. The very first thing that I need to do is to take a look at just this ID column and iterate through each of the row and find the one that matches this ID. So that's precisely what we are going to do. So first, we'll definitely need to get this entire column, the values, and then we'll need to iterate through each of the row. To do that, we'll need to create a utility function And this function, I'm going to call it getRow by column value, which is going to take in a column value. In this case, it's going to be the ID. And I only want to take a look at the ID column. Okay, I only want to take a look at the ID column. So let me put ID over here as a column name. Now, we need to define how getRow by column value function actually works. To do that, I'm going to put it as the second function on top here. It's taking two values, column value and column name. Now, for this function, it will need to access the table, so we need to use getTodoTable. And we need to get the entire data range for that table. Table get data range. So when we call get data range, it's going to return us this entire thing. Basically, it's an array of arrays. Once we have the data range, we need to get the values. Right? So now we need to find the column index based on the column name. To do that, we'll need to access the headers first. This is the headers that I'm talking about. This is the headers. To get a headers, I'll call values and I'll access the first index, which is index 0. Right? So right now, index 0 is this. So now I need to find out what is the column index. I'm going to call headers index of column name. So this is the column name. Basically what I'm trying to do is, you notice that I've supplied an ID. So this is actually ID. Basically what we are doing right now is that when we look at this entire header, I'm going to look at which of the index, which of the column actually matches the word ID. In this case, of course, it's the first index. Right? So from here, we get the column index. The next thing that we need to do is to check whether the column index is valid. If the column name that's been given is none, it doesn't matches any of this function, you return a -1. So in this case, we're just going to put in a if statement to check, hey, is the column index, as long as the column index is not equals to -1, we can proceed to get the row, find out which is the row that matches that column value. Okay, so we're going to loop through each row to find the matching value in the specified column. Okay, we're going to run a for loop. Let I equals to 1, I values.length, I plus plus. Okay, you may be wondering why we are starting at 1. The reason why we are starting at 1 is because we have a header. This is a header. So we are actually starting to iterate from this second row onwards, which is, you're going to put 1, right? Now, inside the loop, we need to check for this column in this row whether it matches the given value. If it matches, we need to return the row number if a match is found. So we're going to return I plus 1. Alright, so why do we need to plus 1? So we are adding 1 to account for 0 based indexing in arrays and 1 based indexing in Google Sheets. So that's the reason for it. And of course, if we can't find anything that matches, we will return -1 if no matching value is found. So return -1. right? So now that we have this function that allows us to get the row by the column value, we're able to get our row number. All right. Now that we know what is a row number that matches the ID, we'll need to, so we just double check whether the row number is equals to -1. If it equals to -1, then we're just going to return and truncate the whole getTodo function, and it's just going to return nothing. If the row number actually exists, this is what we're going to do. We're going to access the row range from this table, and we're going to get the to-do data, the to-do row. To get the to-do row from the row range, we're going to call getValues, and we're going to access the first index in order to get the row. Once we have the to-do row, all we have to do is to return the to-do row. All right, so now that we have created the to-do function, the getTodo function, we'll just include it in our test file and call it test getTodo. getTodo, and let's see whether it works. So we're going to include an ID. So let's say that we want to get this third one, right? So I'm just going to copy the ID and paste it over here. So we're going to console log to see whether we get the correct row back. I'm going to use JSON stringify to do. Okay, let's run the test getTodo function and see whether we get the correct row. All right, so the row, we have retrieved it, and the to-do is buy apple at supermarket. All right, so this is correct, buy apple at supermarket. So we have successfully created our getTodo function. Next, we'll see how we can create an updateTodo function. updateTodo. So to update the to-do function, we need to take in two arguments, the ID and the content that is supposed to be updated. So first, we will need to get the table. Once we get the table, we will need to find out what is the row number that matches the given ID. So once we have the ID, we'll need a way to modify the existing row. So to modify an existing row, we'll need to first get the row range. All right, we need to get a row range. Once we get the row range, we will have that ability to manipulate the values within that specified row range. Okay, so first thing first, let's get the table. Once we have the table, we need to find out what is the row number that matches the given ID. So we use the get row by column value. The column we're looking at is ID. Next, we'll need to get the row range. To get the row range, we use the table and get range. As for the row, include the row number. And starting column is gonna be the first column, because that's going to be the ID. And the number of rows that we want to return is just one row. And the total number of columns in the table, it is going to be the entire column length. So get last column. Okay, so now we have our row range. We'll need to get the row value. So row range, get values. and access the first row. Now, there are two things that we need to update. We need to update the content and the updated add field. So let's update the content first. Within the row value, we know that the content is in the second column. Okay, so we need to access the content like this. So let's update the content accordingly. Now, the next thing that we need to update is the updated add field. Updated add field is at the fourth column, and that's going to be the third index. So new date to ISO string. Once we have updated the values, over here we need to actually update it in the table instead. So we need to use the row range that we have access to and set values. When we set values, be very careful here. Always put in an array first. Once we have an array, you will need to put in another array, and that other array is the row value. Okay, just remember that the entire row value is actually just an array, and for set values, you need to take in a 2D array. Okay, so once we are done, we will need to test this updateTodo function. So let's go to our test file, function test updateTodo. So let's update the to-do. The first argument is actually the ID. Okay, let's say we want to update this one. I'll copy the ID. And for the content, I want to update it to say that, hey, actually I want to buy specifically 5 apples, 5 times apple. All right. So before I click run, again, make sure that you change it to the correct function. I'm going to change it to test updateTodo. So just take note, right now this is our value, buy apple at supermarket. And of course, our updated date, it will change later on. So let me click run. Execution completed. If we check back at our table, you notice that the content is updated. Now it's buy 5 times apple at supermarket. And the updated add value, it has been changed as well. So that shows that the updateTodo function is working properly. The last function that we will create is the deleteTodo function. So deleteTodo function is very simple. I just need to take in an ID. Within the function, access the table, getTodoTable. And then the next thing I need to do is to find out what is a row number that matches this ID. Get row by column value. Put in the ID. I want to access the ID column. Once we have the row number, in order to delete off that row, just call table.deleteRow and put your row number over here. So now let's test out this deleteTodo function. Go to our test file, function test deleteTodo. deleteTodo, and you'll take in an ID. So let's say that we want to delete this row at the center here. I'm going to copy the ID and paste it over here. Now, before I click on run, make sure I change the function and change it to test deleteTodo. Before we run the function, I want you to notice something. If I just delete off this row like this by pressing delete, okay, let me just copy this field first. If I just press delete like this, you notice that this entire row, there's an empty space over here. What we want to do is, after this row is deleted, this row is just going to move up like this automatically. It's just going to move up like this automatically. All right. So this is what this deleteTodo function precisely done. So after we delete off this row, anything below it, it will close the gap above it. Okay. Let's see whether it actually works. Let's run the test. Go to our test file and click run test deleteTodo. All right. So now you can see that the entire row has been deleted successfully. So that shows that our delete row function is working correctly. Now that you have created all these functions to manipulate your database, your next step is probably to make it accessible via an API. To do just that, I've created a separate video called REST APIs using Google Sheet. I've included the video link down in the description below. You can go and check it out. So if you find this video useful, do give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.